John O'Brien. I represent Windsor Orange One, which is Royalton in my hometown of Tonbridge.
Oh, okay. Great fair.
Heather Supranat, Windsor 4, Barnard, Pomfret, Bridgewater, West Hartford.
David Durfee, I live in Shaftesbury, Bennington County.
Leland Morgan, I represent Grand Isle County and the western portion of Milton.
Jed Lipsky represent Memorial One, Stowe.
And Richard Nelson, Orleans One, Derby.
And I am Dr. Karen Bradley. I reside in East Montpelier and work in Berlin, Vermont at Onion River Animal Hospital. And I am here on behalf, thank you so much for making time. You guys have so many things to do, but making time for the Vermont Veterinary Medical Association. I'll just call the VVMA. We are very acronym soup heavy in veterinary medicine. And so we represent a huge majority of the veterinarians in Vermont, and I would say 85 to 90% of the practicing veterinarians in Vermont. It is a small profession in Vermont on the national level, and my background too, I have served in the Vermont VMA, starting on the Animal Welfare Committee. I helped found our Government Relations Committee back in like 2002 or 3. And we explored, because we had issues that would come to the State House and would even get passed, and no one had even checked in with the veterinarians at the state as like, well, how will this impact how you work? Or what do you think about this disease process, et cetera? So we recognized that we wanted to be a voice and be a respected voice. So we really appreciate the time and effort. On the national scale, I have served in the House of Delegates and then on the board of directors of our national organization, the American Veterinary Medical Association, so AVMA. So I do get to bring back home to little Vermont. I was actually the first one, and we represent a region on that board in New England, the first time a Vermont veterinarian ever served on the AVMA board. So that was pretty prestigious and a lot of work, but it also exposed me to tons of what's going out in the nation on these animal health issues. So please consider me personally a resource, because if I don't know, I will find someone who knows. And if they're not in Vermont, I will find them from New England. I'm connected to a lot of veterinarians in that way. Where veterinarians tend to care about these issues a lot, but they're also in the trenches working so hard that things can just fly past them and they don't even know that they're happening. So they want to be consulted, but I kind of have to get in their face sometimes to like, hey, I need your input here. So we represent right now, we have 385 members. And I believe if you looked at the number of licensed veterinarians in Vermont, it's going to be like 400 to 410. So pretty good for an association. Part of our purpose is to get out and to our members what is going on in the profession, to be leaders in animal welfare. And we're business owners. We're business owners. And so there are a lot of business issues, but for your committee, the main things are how animals are treated and how we deal with animal disease and surveillance, I would say, are the biggest things. A couple topics. So I did send, so feel free to look through what was supplied to you. Is just like a page and a half about our 3 main topics, because you don't have time for me to give you 20, that are kind of up front and center for us. And let me start with one that is one you'll hear about from the human sector, and that's xylazine. So we know we have an opiate crisis in our country, and we know that part of the scourge and the death can come from cutting it with fentanyl and now xylazine, which is a large animal anesthetic drug used all the time. Yes, all the time, like to float teeth, to trim feet sometimes, like just anything. It's amazing that a horse can stand there, asleep enough to let things happen with xylazine. And so our large animal veterinarians need this drug. Small animal, we rarely use it. When we do, it's just as a small dose, maybe as sedation prior to euthanasia. So still used. It's not been a controlled drug because it's not a human drug, and it's not been considered an abusable drug. So on the national front, the AVMA and our Vermont VMA supporting have been advocates for federal legislation to make it scheduled, like a Schedule 3 DEA drug that could help with bad actors and getting a hold of it. It's not that this drug is being diverted from veterinarians, and there's no evidence of that at all. But what we don't want is veterinarians to not be able to access this drug that's so important to them.
We did last year in one of the bills that we passed add xylazine to the list of
Critical.
opioids that could result in certain charges.
Yes.
It's familiar, but I won't go any further than that. Trying to recall exactly what we did. Did you have a question?
Just quickly, when you were on the numbers of vets in Vermont,
Yes.
do you have any idea of what you called the food animal
Yes, I actually asked that of our executive director so I could get it. We have, she sent it to me. We have about 87 food animal that people classified as food animal veterinarians in Vermont. And so with one of the things we're going to talk about is the food animal veterinary education loan repayment grant that Vermont does. And for that bill, I'll refer to that in just a second. With the xylazine, yes, we are grateful that it was S85 last year. And I think there's about 20 to 26 states that are either making the drug controlled at their state level, that you have to log and handle it like you would anything like morphine. And that is important. But in Vermont in particular was criminal penalties that if you were not a licensed veterinarian to use this drug and it's in your possession, that you can be criminally charged. So we're very grateful for that. And if you have any influence on our national contingent in Congress, we are unfortunately, we advocated with our AVMA to get Welch and Senator Sanders to support this bill that's at the national level to make it a Schedule 3. And their concern is that impact on minority populations, that if this is considered a controlled drug, that the penalties can hit minority communities harder. And while that is a valid concern, we're very worried that at the federal level, this drug could just be not available to us if we don't do something like that. So, and back to food animal veterinarians. So we do have a shortage of veterinarians in general, probably less so on the companion animal side. I think the demand for our services is easing. It was at a critical point, breaking point in the first 2 years, 2020 to 2022, but that has sort of lessened. But in the food animal sector, when we started the veterinary education loan repayment grant program in Vermont, which I believe was about 15 to 17 years ago, Dr. Kristen Haas, our former state veterinarian, I worked together and they identified the critical shortage areas in the Northeast Kingdom was one. And I believe there were 3 that they identified. Now the entire state is considered a critical shortage of food animal veterinarians. So basically anywhere we can get someone and encourage them to take that work. So that program, the legislature allocates $30,000 a year to that each year. We are grateful for that. That is, most of these veterinarians are graduating with at least, and this is a small estimate, $180,000 to $250,000 in debt for college in veterinary medicine. And if you look at what they make and the debt to income ratio, it is at a breaking point. And that is not an easy way to keep veterinarians in there. So something like a grant that you can put towards your student loans is huge. This state veterinarian, there's a small committee that does these awards each year based on a veterinarian's working in food animal medicine in those area, now the whole state. But they probably do weight where they know the shortages are the most. They do a minimum of 5,000 and sometimes 10,000 for each of those veterinarians per year. And so it's each year renewed. So you don't get a grant that you're going to get 10,000 for 3 years in a row, but you can reapply to get one the next year and the next year. So.
Is it just me or are vets also aging out? I mean, it seems like a lot of the vets I grew up with have all reached that retirement age. And so they
Yeah.
leave and we've got some new ones in our area in Tunbridge and Roseland, but for the most part, it seemed like there was a generational sort of retirement that went on in the last 10 years.
Yeah, probably like many professions in our generational, boomer professions, to my Gen X to below and then blooming out again. Yes, it's different type of work. And people who typically go into food animal have very often been, and this is where if anyone wants to get creative on encouraging kids who grow up on farms, many people who go into food animal love those animals. They grew up around them. They went to the fairs. They saw veterinarians doing it. One of my employees who's getting her vet school interview right now, grew up at the Icelandic horse farm. So has been around all of this and a desire to go back to it. So yes, we need to encourage that. But yeah, there is a change. It is very hard work. As we're talking about, it's ambulatory. You have to go in any weather, any conditions, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And that is hard for anybody. And generationally, you see people not always wanting that type of work. So there needs to be whatever we can to support veterinarians to do this work.
Nelson.
Thank you, Chair. Just how many seats do we still have seats at, like at Penn or Cornell, Tufts,
So, full disclosure, my son is in his second year at UVM and wants to be a veterinarian, which I'm very happy about.
excellent.
And so my husband has done all the research into this. So we actually, UVM, we have no seats for Vermonters. But UVM has some good connections with various colleges. Since Canada is closing the border to their veterinary schools for US students.
Really?
Yes, they have had too much criticism of not allowing enough Canadians into their school that they're cutting off US students joining their veterinary schools for
Well,
now.
if they're not smart enough to go to vet school, maybe they shouldn't go to vet school. I didn't say that.
Well, so there were some with the school in Toronto, and I'm gonna say it wrong, Guelph, but that doesn't exist anymore. But at Tufts, working with Edinburgh and Glasgow over in Scotland,
Mhm.
those schools, there are several, I think about 4 seats at each school that are typically like prioritized or reserved for students in programs shared from UVM. I believe there are a couple with Cornell, but basically it's Tufts, those schools. And I don't think there are any others right now.
And they lost their seats at Penn.
Yeah, not like guaranteed, because, yeah,
Yeah, okay. And there's no place colder on a January night than a horse barn treating a horse with colic.
right,
I've been there.
yes. It's harsh, it is harsh.
There's no place in the world colder.
Gotta keep it moving too.
Yeah.
Oh,
With the cows, at least you're warm enough your arm.
yeah.
Got a warm stuff coming around.
Mm.
So yeah, so that is part, and as you said, part of it is and when you have the big farms, like we talked about briefly in our chatter beforehand, is a big farm that is employing like 2 veterinarians. It is, a lot of their work is literally on the computer because they know every weight. They're manipulating food rations and anything that is, supporting growth. They're increasing milk production and obviously disease surveillance, but also with vaccinations and everything. And it's a well-oiled machine that they're supervising, and their hands-on doing things is minimal, and it's concentrated into big places. You go, you got many animals to treat, kind of like when the animals come to me at my hospital. Versus in Vermont, someone having a small herd, getting the vet there can be a challenge, and it's often going to be for a problem versus the preventing the problems before they happen. So
Thank you, Jim. Is any consideration, and not to lessen the profession, because it is such a noble profession, and the intelligence required, it is just, I'm amazed, but any idea of like going to PAs or nurse practitioners, finding someone that maybe can't go to vet school, but could get a master's and work on cows or work on horses, be species or ruminants,
right.
has a hand fine enough to, I want to say calve out sheep or goats, but that's not the right term, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Is there any thought given to that?
Well, there's a lot of that happening, right? There's a lot of times if a farm is a medium size even, they have people on the team who have been taught how to diagnose that displaced abomasum or to palpate for pregnancy and
Absolutely.
things like that. So there are a lot of that happening, not in a critical, let's create a PA or nurse practitioner field necessarily. Not entirely, but on those big farms we're talking about, like the 2 veterinarians that are running the whole shebang. Oh, believe me, they have, without like a dedicated program or licensing, they have people doing those things and funneling the information, just like I do. Were the anal glands impacted? Did you, when you put the ultrasound probe on and got that urine sample from the bladder, that's like, there are medical technologists who do those things. My team is doing that, but they're doing that either because they have had education or training, not that they're licensed or regulated to do it.
So, we milk 2,000 cows.
Mhm.
So I can probably check down to 45 days pretty good.
Yes,
My son and my nephews can go down to 37.
yep,
So we do a lot of that stuff already, but I just, but I don't go to my neighbor's farm and do it. And I think I'd be in violation of a whole host of things if I went to my neighbor's farm and do it. Maybe not pride checking, but diagnosis for sure,
Right.
or recommending.
And that's where most practice acts, like in Vermont, a lot of that is can be done under the supervision of a veterinarian. And what is that supervision? Well, if the veterinarian who treats your neighbor's cows also treats yours, is familiar with the skill of your family members you just mentioned, they might be very comfortable saying to the other farm, like, hey, if you need this, I've worked with them, I've seen the results, and I trust them, and they can reach out to me if they have questions. So there's ways that we're sort of organically doing that, I would say. But it is technically, right, what's the consequence of something done wrong, a mistake, right? Sometimes it's not a big deal, but economically it could be, right?
Depends on,
Do you have employees who are not veterinarians, don't have that degree, but do a lot of the technical work?
Yeah, so we do have veterinary technicians, and one thing this committee could be very committed to is that we keep our Vermont Technical College having a veterinary technician program. We have a real dearth of veterinary technicians, which are our nurses. So the schooling is usually 2 years, and there's a certificate. Many can practice whether they pass that test or not. They just don't get the certified technician classification, recognition. Often there's some pay and responsibility associated with that. And in states that do license those professions, they can be precluded from doing certain things like drawing blood or getting that urine sample or palpating cows or doing any of these things without that certification. So Vermont does not license our technicians right now. So we do have technicians and assistants. It's mostly that they have proven within the practice that they are skilled enough to keep doing those things.
So let's,
Doctors, is that a program at Randolph or is it at other states?
It's at Randolph, yes, yes. I would love it if it were doubled. The veterinarians of Vermont will tell you that is one of the reasons we had such a hard time in the last few years is we needed more of our nurses. The other, if we want to, I'm open to any questions on any of this. And often I find these conversations, especially when we're like open-ended, is take me down any path. And if I don't know the answer, I will find out. But one that I thought would be good to talk about is H5N1 or avian influenza. You're going to hear about it in the news. This is a real fear, and I'm not a person who fears a lot of things, but in veterinary medicine, we were taught from the get-go in school that, and you, as you know, all emerging diseases in human come from animals. They are diseases that are evolving from animals. So we are on the front lines of finding and seeing animal disease that can be our next pandemic. And will be our next pandemic. And so this one is extremely scary to me. My husband's a nurse practitioner. We have 20 chickens in our backyard. As I mentioned, I see chickens, I see ducks, I see cats, dogs. And this virus is very, very scary. It can mutate very well. It's about one mutation away from being human to human transmission. Just yesterday, the Vermont Department of Health sent out a bulletin that my husband and I both read, and we're like, sheesh. And I literally have 2 team members out with influenza A right now from my work. So in human medicine right now in Vermont, they are asking all healthcare professionals to now ask people who are coming in with flu symptoms, first of all, cordon them off where you can keep them from exposing other people. Ask them, do they have pets? Do they have cats? Have they consumed or do they work around raw milk? Like, do they milk cows? Do they work on a dairy farm? Do they consume raw milk or even aged raw? So that they can get more of this information so that we can know when or if people are actually suffering from H5N1 in a human. We do have human cases throughout the country right now. There's only been 1 death, thankfully, but they can be as mild as I work on a dairy farm and I've got conjunctivitis to I have the flu and I'm in the hospital. And so that being from I was milking the cow, not that I even consumed it, but that exposure. So that is why it's on the veterinary side, critically important that we support our agency of ag and our state veterinarian and anything associated with USDA to test milk, all milk, pre-pasteurization, pasteurized on that for this, because we are finding it in our milk, and that is the source for people. Also, raw poultry. There are unfortunately a lot of people who think feeding raw chicken to their pet is a great idea. That is a direct transmission to that cat or dog for H5N1 to get into their pet and then into their household. Cats' bodies are amazing at taking a virus and mutating it a little bit to then become spread within their species and then to other species. So back to the human bulletin that came around yesterday, they are now taking anybody who goes to the doctor right now and they test you for influenza A, sending it in to be tested for H5N1, the subtype, so that we can make sure that, because you can test positive for human influenza A, but what you actually have is H5N1, the avian influenza. So we need to be surveillance, right? We need to know and be prepared for this.
You're familiar with EB4 and they're testing fall tanks now in Vermont
For which,
for HPAI.
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
and bulletin today, 170 samples have been run and all negative.
That's great. Yes.
So,
And so far, I think that, yes, we have to keep monitoring our milk. But the other thing that that was pointed out to me is we're also pretty lucky that we don't bring in, there are states that have banned movement of dairy cattle right now because they have H5N1 in their milk and they don't want any new coming in, or they don't have it and they don't want it coming in. We said to tend to send more cows out of our state than we bring in, which is good for now.
and they're required to be tested now to come in,
Yes.
which is good.
And that's the kind of funding you do not want to cut.
So thinking about backyard chicken flocks.
Yeah.
What should, some of us may have chickens.
Yeah.
Some of us know people who have chickens, probably all of us. What should we be looking for?
Death.
I'm sorry,
Death.
death specifically.
It's horrible. There's a couple types of influenza. This is HP, highly pathogenic. Highly pathogenic means they get it, they die, and they pass it quickly. So yes, the ones that have been diagnosed in Vermont and are, like, we think our little isolated flock, where are they going to be exposed? Usually wild birds. And so if I find a dead wild bird on my property, it's usually 10 feet from my window and it's slammed into the window, right? And so my husband and I in talking about this is, yes, any dead wild birds should be reported to Fish and Wildlife so that they can collect and we can be surveilling. But then, yes, any backyard, like my flock, my husband said, what do I watch for? I'm like, well, if anybody dies, we should get them tested. And we got to really watch because usually one bird dies quickly, several die. And that's usually what it is. And the flock should probably be depopulated at that point, unfortunately.
Chickens die all the time.
Yeah, yeah. And we don't have, I don't know if, I can't think of a single like poultry veterinarian in this state.
Dedicated poultry.
Yes. I mean, that's why people are calling me to see their sick pet bird and that's in the backyard. And I'm really not wanting to even bring them in the building right now.
Representative Nelson.
Yeah, no, Dr. Karen went back to Maine
Yeah,
and she was working with DeCosta.
yeah,
For a while. Also brilliant bovine vet.
yes.
So our backyard chicken flocks aren't registered. There's
Right.
no one knows how they are, where they are, who they are.
Right.
So we're kind of like our dairy farms are all registered.
Yeah.
Have a license number to ship milk. Is that a concern for your group that we don't have a pulse on where these critters are?
That is a great question. I think when we work with, say, like our agency of ag, the workload they have, they would not be able to
Mhm.
deal with registration, regulation, following through on it, I don't think.
Yeah.
So I think, yes, I mean, people can have 3 in the city of Montpelier or 6 or whatever. It's just little ordinances. So yes, it's more, I think we have to get the word out, places where
Education.
people go, where they're buying their chicken food.
Yeah.
They need to know, if you have sick or dying birds, call the state vet.
Yeah. It's education.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So, and short of observing a sick or a dead member of your flock, are there precautions that we as chicken owners can take?
Yeah, the biggest one is, I mean, it's very hard to isolate them from being around wild birds, but just vigilance. And also trying not to go birds to birds. So if your neighbor has chickens, don't go play with them and then come home to yours. So the same type of thing of, cleaning, changing clothes that you would. They are literally on the big farms, they are installing wash stations so that as the trucks come on and off the farms, they are being hosed down with disinfectant in places to try to prevent the spread. But yeah, mostly us being aware. And then if any of our birds are sick or we're in really close quarters to them, we obviously should wear respiratory protection.
Is there concern about human consumption of eggs, transmission through?
That I have not read about. I have not read about that yet. The meat, yes. It's not been cooked. I mean, it should be denatured and cooked. They are working on vaccine. So I think that was something that's going to be emerging. I think that the way the USDA has it is they basically have their field testing for vaccination so that they're ready to, usually those are strategic and they're ready to pull the plugs when they need to. But the biggest thing consumers are seeing right now, you hear all about the price of eggs. Those of us who are growing them in the backyard, I'll give them away. If anybody wants a couple dozen, I have too many right now because of this. But yes, that is, you've seen it on the news. There are places in the nation where the shelves are blank with eggs. And that is because of major farms having to be completely depopulated because of H5N1 hitting.
And a tractor trailer truck going off the road too the other night. Full of
Really?
eggs.
It's loaded.
Loaded.
Where were they?
Out of New York.
From Pete Jerry's.
Yeah.
Was there anything else that you wanted to mention, just because we're nearing the end of the hour?
No, probably. I mean, I guess I always look on the wall and the only thing that I've seen in detail come across that if H14 comes up to you guys at all or H4, please reach out. We will get the right people to answer the right questions,
Thank
whether
you.
on Zoom or in person. And we're,
Great. Yeah, we had a walkthrough of the second bill, and we'll have, I think maybe next week, the first bill will also get a walkthrough on. Whether we'll take it up and take any testimony beyond that, I'm not sure, but thank you. We'll definitely keep you on the list. Any other questions from committee or any other thoughts?
Just a thought, it's sort of veterinary policy in some ways, it seems I don't know if national vet organizations are pushing back, but we used to be able to go to, say, Tractor Supply and buy penicillin, and now you can't do it anymore.
Right.
And so many farmers in the last 20 years seem to almost become sort of, de facto vets in a lot of
Right.
ways. They could do all these things. And now I'm seeing more vets setting up practices saying, we need a relationship with
yes,
this farmer first. So there's a lot of economy that goes into this. Can we afford a vet, to
Right.
come out and treat a $150 sheep with a $500 bill? And so, and you can't even, go and treat it yourself anymore. So.
yeah. So, and I have seen that in my 28 years of being a veterinarian that yes, so antimicrobials and antibiotics in particular, that has all come out of human medicine. And you can read countless, some inaccurate data and not, but when we talk about antimicrobial and antibiotic resistance in humans, it's a huge, huge issue and problem. And the veterinarians will say it's because the medical doctors overprescribe these and we don't comply and take the full 7-day course. We stop it after 2 days. We take it for a virus, which makes no sense, et cetera. But the human doctors and what has come to the surface louder, there are 10 of them for every one of us, is that we are the problem in food animal medicine. We have allowed antibiotics to be, put into food. They are very against antibiotics or antimicrobials in the food, which from the food animal medicine, we know they may grow bigger, they get less disease, they produce more milk. There are benefits that are not necessarily contributing to resistance, but having the exact which ones do, which ones don't, And that is where we had our food animal veterinarians had to advocate. And basically, so now any food additive that is antimicrobial or antibiotic has to have a veterinary food directive by a veterinarian, which doesn't always mean they have to come examine all the animals, but that and the administration. And so that's why that dried up, is because of the misuse and abuse of it. I do know that with that relationship with veterinarians, I am very impressed with how efficient food animal veterinarians often are, though, with the farms, that they've established that relationship, that you know how to use it. Because the other thing we saw, and we saw a lot, and Vermont was one of the worst states about having violations in food animal residue, where when tested, meat and eggs and milk from our state, well, not eggs, would have antibiotics in them that are not even allowed to be used in that species. I can think of a couple examples. I will not give details of here today, of veterinarians fully licensed in our state administering antibiotics to food animal species that are illegal to do. And then that cow, its meat and its milk, going into our food stream. And that is not okay. So that's where that came from. So it's unintended when people could have used them appropriately. But I do see them very often, a phone consult. Okay, I'm going to have you pick up and administer this, and not always the big visit. So there are times, but usually once they have that established rapport and relationship with that veterinarian, it doesn't always require the exam and the visit. They will allow and prescribe, and here's the syringes, needles, and the antibiotic to give for this condition. So,
VPR is called, right? Veterinary.
VCPR, veterinary client patient relationship.
And it's even on the big dairy farms in Vermont, we have a VCPR, and the veterinary comes out a few times a year, walks the facility with you, does an inspection, and hey, we have a new protocol we'd like you to try. And or there's new medicines out there on the horizon. Let's see what, watch, see what these can do. But she's referring to some class of drugs like gentamicin.
Yeah.
How many dairy farmers use gentamicin back in the day? And that is hard
Right.
to get out of the animal.
Even infusing up into the teats, into the mammary gland, it can stay in that tissue and be detectable in the milk later. And when they test a bulk tank, if there's even trace in there, the whole tank has to go.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so it's a balancing act.
So we have several documents that you forwarded to
Yes.
that are on our committee page, so the committee can look at those at your leisure. And thank you for.
Sidonia, right? Am I saying your name right?
Okay.
Yeah, she has my email address. Anyone on the committee, feel free to email me personally. Our executive director, Linda Waite Simpson, who was also in the State House years ago, knows a lot of people, but so reach out to us, Gabrielle, Patty, anybody. Yes, they will be efficient. We'll get the answers for you. And we just care about the animals and the people in the state. So it's not because it's anything in our pockets.
Great. Well, thank you for coming in. Thank you for bearing with the technical.
Thank you. Yes. Oh, well, I love not being on Zoom. So, and I live close enough that I'm happy to race down anytime.